Welcome. I'm Professor Julian Yeo, and thank you for attending today's session. I'm proud to be hosting the Faculty Insight series this semester with my colleague, Professor Lisa Leslie. The theme of the series this spring is current and future trends. Each week, we invite 1 to 2 faculty members to present an important business trend, where it has been, and perhaps even make some bold predictions about where it is going. Our faculty expert today is Professor Joost van Dreunen. Professor van Dreunen is considered the top academic in the 160 billion video games industry. He holds a PhD from Columbia University. He is the author of the book One Up, a book that offers an empirical analysis of innovation and strategy in the video game industry and explains how the video game industry has evolved to become a mainstream form of entertainment. Professor van Dreunen teaches business of video games at NYU Stern. Before Stern, he was the co-founder and CEO of Superdata Research, a games market research firm, which he sold in 2018. He is an advisor and investor and writes a weekly newsletter on gaming, tech, and entertainment called Super Yo's Playlist. In terms of format, Professor van Dreunen is going to present for about 20 minutes. After that, I'll moderate 10 minutes of Q&A from the audience. If you have a question during the presentation, please submit it to me during the presentation as a private chat message. I will select a few questions to ask during the Q&A. We very much look forward to your question. After the Q&A, our faculty expert will provide some discussion questions, and you will have a chance to talk about them and socialize with your peers in breakout sessions. I'll say more about the breakout structure when we get to that point. Without further ado, I will turn things over to Professor van Dreunen. We are delighted to have you here and excited about your presentation on video games and the future of entertainment.
Thank you, Julian. I appreciate the intro, and thank you all, of course, for attending and hosting and having me. It's a common story in my career that games are this fringe form of activity and entertainment. And so I appreciate over the years that people have spent more time and energy around this. And so thank you for that to start. What I'm going to do is walk you through a little bit of my background, what has transpired in the games industry over the last 10 to 20 years, how we could think about that in terms of things that are interesting to other categories of entertainment and other forms of business, and then what the future perhaps may hold for all of us. Right? So I believe you can all see my slides. So in that assumption, I'm going to kick that off. Well, here's another picture of me. This is me post-pandemic. It wasn't as bad before. But really the thing to know about me, first and foremost, and sort of what drives a lot of my own, I guess, professional inquiry as an analyst and as an investor, as well as my academic endeavors, which is, why is it that people never quite understood the games industry in the way that I did? My brother and I, we would spend hours playing Tetris and Super Mario growing up, only to find, of course, that my mom and my family, the rest of my family, were just as much into video games, but in a sort of clandestine, secretive way, never quite admitting that they too like to play games. So as I grew up in the world, I first did a degree in media studies at the University of Amsterdam, which was a lot of postmodern French media theory, which is, wonderfully interesting, but it doesn't really quite pay the rent. I ended up first at the Columbia Business School working as a project manager on a large-scale project on media consolidation and ownership among American media and entertainment with Professor Julian, and then later ended up doing a PhD there with the centralized topic of video games, and really to look at it as a form of communication in my mind, right? It's a cultural industry. It has expressive values to it. But one of the components in all of this that tends to go south or that goes underrepresented is the idea that the economics of a media or an entertainment industry have an enormous impact on the types of narratives and the type of experiences that come out of it, right? If I were to tell you that the editorial division for the New York Times was populated only by white men in their 30s, no one would read the New York Times, right? They would say, well, this is a biased newspaper. It has no diversity in terms of editorial staff. Why would we believe them? Yet that is something that in the games industry has been the case for a long time. And so you have these fundamental issues in an industry that I believe is fascinating without really taking a deeper look. So the economic analysis for me, to put it differently, is really to get a better understanding of how it works and how it does what it does and how it produces the things we see. So sort of the three sections I had in mind today would roughly summarize as follows. I'm going to give you just an overview of the industry real quick, then a little bit of why I believe some of its innovation, how it plays out, where it plays out, and why it's relevant, and then what's in the years to come. What are some of the trends we could distinguish? So the natural starting point for me is always to talk about how big things are, right? So we have 3 billion gamers in the world. We have $160 billion in spending. If you've been listening to the news today, which perhaps we'll get a chance to cover later, Epic and Apple, two of the largest companies in the world, are currently entangled in a lawsuit with each other about app store rates. And as a result, they're disclosing a lot of information that people didn't know. The company behind Fortnite made $5 billion, just to give you an idea, which is a tremendous amount of money in a single year for any entertainment company to yield. And even so, that doesn't even put it in the top 10 of the largest game companies out there, right? So we have these big dollar figures, incredible growth behind the industry, a lot of momentum, but nobody's really, quite sure what's going on there and how it operates. One of the big moments and sort of the day in the sun that the games industry has been enjoying over the last year and a half now is, of course, the pandemic. People have been sheltering in place. They've been staying at home. They've been trying to stay on friendly terms with their family, and as a result, found some virtual environment or some video game to play instead of picking a fight with a sibling, because it's not been easy for a lot of people, obviously. And so the games industry, different from most other industries over the last year, has blossomed, right? So we have this incredible year on the books with 30% or more growth across the sector compared to double what Standard & Poor's. And so that tends to draw the attention. A lot of people start to pay attention suddenly. It's like, oh, well, what's happening? What's happening with the leadership, with the big companies in this space, and why didn't we notice before? And the question really, of course, from a business perspective is this a statistical outlier? Is this something that just kind of happened and is one and done and we'll never see it again? Or is this the shape of things to come? Is this something that has been underway? Has there been some broader phenomenon of change that's been happening, some change in consumer behavior in the way that we produce content and distribute it, and that now suddenly comes to the forefront? And of course, my answer predictably would be, of course, this has been a slow glacial transition that, in the cliche observation, has been accelerated by the pandemic. And to make that obvious, so if we look at the digitalization of three different entertainment industries, we see here games, music, and video. The games industry really did an excellent job embracing that early on, right? The mindset of most executives in the games industry was to embrace digital distribution, whereas in music and video, that has long been something that they pushed away and refused to accept. Particularly in the music industry, the word piracy was much more prevalent than coming up with new revenue models and new distribution models. The same, of course, for video. Video really only started to pick up in 2016 in terms of becoming bigger than physical media, right? DVDs and movie theaters, where you have direct consumer spend. And so the games industry positions itself from the beginning in a very different way, where more conventional entertainment categories have resisted the move towards digitalization. The games industry has embraced it. And you see that immediately represented in their revenue models. In the conventional sense, where we have a disc that you buy at GameStop, and then you go home and you put it in your PlayStation or in your Xbox, that product model is a very rudimentary, very basic way of measuring and observing the industry. It has shifted remarkably since then. So now we have games as a service where, like the broader entertainment, the broader software markets, you now pay a monthly subscription, you pay an annual fee for Microsoft Word. The same you do with games. Games are now freely available. They are something that allow you to download initially for free, and then you add a new level, you add some outfit for your characters. You can make your characters do little dances. There's this myriad of ways in which audiences are now monetized that are very different. And so as the games industry embraces digitalizations, it also opened up a variety of new revenue channels, which then, of course, in turn impact how games manifest themselves. And the best way, perhaps, to make that obvious is to borrow here from one of my colleagues at the Columbia University Press. We have fundamentally a shift in the relationship between the game and the players. It used to be one to many, the sort of traditional broadcast model almost, where the game makers of the world, the publishers of the world, they would release a single title and then reach lots and lots of people. And then over time, that all became connected and online. And as a consequence, now it's all about the network effects that drive things, right? It's the ability to play with others. It's the ability to trade with others. It's the ability to communicate with others in the game that really becomes its core value. And to give you an example, Super Mario was really something. It was a platform game that you would play by yourself, and you would watch your kid brother play and take turns. Whereas World of Warcraft is, of course, an online universe where you play with thousands of others. And so over a period of, say, 20 years, the industry has shifted from single-player games all the way to multiplayer and online gaming. And that created a huge boom in terms of how people experience the games industry. So, to stay with the big number rhetoric, what you see then, for instance, in terms of monthly active users is ridiculous numbers, right? Over 200 million monthly actives for titles like Honor of Kings by Tencent, which is coincidentally also, of course, the largest game publisher in the world. Activision Blizzard, a North American publisher, 150 million just for Candy Crush Saga. You know who you are. You've played it. You may not admit it, but you've tried it. And if you haven't, you should totally do it, because it's 150 million people can't be wrong. And as you go down the list, you'll notice, of course, that there's lots and lots of titles that just garner audiences the size of which traditional media could only dream about, right? If you imagine getting this many people in a movie theater, or this many people to download something or watch something on Netflix, it's just unheard of. And so then the natural component to all of this is, like, as we have this abundant digital content, this buffet of just lots of titles coming out, all these new revenue models, lots of big publishers spending a great deal of money to bring this all to market, we of course now also have new phenomena that perhaps are a little less obvious to more traditional executives in entertainment, particularly around watching other people play video games. In fact, the two things to know here are very simply put: Twitch, which is a subsidiary of Amazon, which it acquired in 2014 for about $1 billion. All it really does is show you other people playing video games, and you can kind of go through it. Their viewership, as you see here on the right, has now reached an average of over 2 million concurrent viewers, which means on average, it has 2 million people at the same time watching all of these feeds, which is a tremendous amount of eyeballs at any one point, right? Some shows get that over the entirety of an episode. I believe it's compared to more conventional video media, it's it breaks a lot of records. At the same time, you have to, of course, then assume, like, well, why are these people watching? You have to make some assumptions about some of the motivations here. So that's one piece. The second thing to know is, and it was just last week when we hear Bill Maher having something to say about this, and in the conventional mind, in the mind of people that are grown up, that have grown up in the traditional entertainment industry, this makes no sense. Right? This is a total waste of time, as they put it, and it's something that is totally foreign to them and seemingly irrelevant and trivial. And I'm not going to get into the cultural implications or about the formulation of a space of their own, as these audiences do, away from more conventional incumbent forms of entertainment. But I will say, of course, that it's become so large now that there is only you can only react to it. Like these a phenomenon like Twitch has grown so large that this is now something that's part of your life. If you have kids at home, you've been watching your child watching Minecraft on YouTube, as I have, or they've been watching other people playing Fortnite on Twitch. There's this abundance of video entertainment online that doesn't make any sense to a lot of parents, but the kids love it, right? And that's a big takeaway here. So that gives you an indication of largely the size of things, and also sort of the things that are really growing very rapidly. perhaps one of the most tangible phenomenon from a few years ago, and if you were around NYU at the time, you would recognize this. Thousands of people suddenly came out of their houses, to chase Pokemon all around New York City and all around the world together as a, one sort of fun activity. I spent most of the summer in 2016 explaining to traditional media and journalists that gaming wasn't some activity mostly enjoyed by people that live in their parents' basements. It was something that we all did because we all had the mobile phone, we all have an iPhone, and so we're all chasing Pokemon. And it was this hula hoop for a summer that really, really got a lot of people very excited. And so for the first time, see the sheer numbers of people out there playing games, that was a new realization for a lot of existing people, existing observers of the industry. So if I presented you with the numbers, then of course, okay, well, is it just that, right? Is it just the size of things? And the fundamental answer in my experience is no. There is something to this that I think is novel and unique. And there's lessons in gaming that we could apply elsewhere. First and foremost, you have to wonder when Pepsi was putting together its campaign with one of the Kardashians and having her hand over a Pepsi to kind of alleviate some protest activity, some animosity in this commercial. There was no one in the room to say this is a terrible idea. Right? The same with Quibi, where we have these industry legends raising $1.8 billion to build some app that no one asked for. There was no one in the room that says, hey, we should test this against the market. Have we asked the 14-year-olds of the world if this is what they want? Or maybe Magic Leap, right? The incredible promise of virtual reality manifested in a single set of goggles that are either unaffordable or just not interesting enough. And so you have these massive productions with all this talent and all this money behind it that just totally doesn't go anywhere. And if you were to narrow it down, it's because so often do entertainment industries and companies believe that they know the answer, right? They are building blockbuster hits. They're going to keep it secret for a long time. And only then do they release it to the public. Moses comes down the mountain and here it is presented and you're all going to love it. You can't resist it. That doesn't turn out to be the case, right? In gaming, so often we find much more a software approach where things are iterative, where a free-to-play title is released, 40% developed, and then slowly perfected over time. Things are added, things are taken away, analytics feed into that. The same successes we perhaps see with Amazon Prime and Netflix, but as companies start leveraging the data that they have available from their user base, they end up having an opportunity to develop things in a different way. So one of the innovative components, and I write about this extensively in the book because I feel like there's a rainbow of different innovations available from the games industry, but two that will stand out to you include this one. Organizational innovation, as boring and as consultancy as that may sound, is a key component to success. All right. So in a company like Valve, which is a privately held company that makes about $5 billion a year, is known for titles like Dota, for CSGO. Not only did they innovate in a radical way as to who creates the content, they even internally have a very low, a very flat hierarchy with regards to how they're organized. And so the company itself allows their employees full flexibility, right? So this is why they will always refer to it as like, oh, why is there wheels under my desk? Why does my desk have wheels? Purely because it allows you to just go and sit with some other coworker and colleague and work on a project that you both decided or the group of you decided was worth pursuing. And so giving agency to lower ranks in the organization to not have one overarching genius in some old-fashioned model send the message down and be the fully in charge of creative control. You now have an organization that relies more of a distributed model. And you see that in this case with Valve, which is a big deal when it comes to not just PC titles, but also PC distribution. Steam is their digital storefront. They have thousands of games there. It's a precursor to the App Store that we see with Apple and Google today. And they make most of their money there, obviously, but they radically changed the landscape in terms of PC game development. if we look further down, we have in the mobile space another company, very different, but has a similar approach, where we have Supercell, which is a Finnish company that is known for Clash of Clans, Clash Royale. It's 300 people, 400 people total. They make billions of dollars a year, right? And so, in other words, like, what drives their success is not so much that they have, you know, a secret lab where they build cool stuff and then maybe they'll release it with some big marketing campaign. They also have this very distributed, flat hierarchy, allowing people to pursue ideas and creative projects that are interesting to them, and they're constantly being checked and being vetted. And that sort of iterative process allows them to beat the competition. Of course, then more broadly, we've been hearing about the games industry being sort of a fad for most of its existence. In the early, I guess, years following the release of the iPhone, people were very much in love with the idea that the console would now be disrupted, right? The iPhone was very powerful. It was in the hands of lots of people. And so consequently, the console was no longer going to be around. Lots of people like to write about how the console was dead. That never happened, right? In fact, it's not just that the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X that recently came out in November last year, it's not just that they did very well. If you look at the fundamental economics for these companies, like a PlayStation, its game division for Sony managed through digitalization, not just grow their business, but they got out of that cataclysmic set of quarters where every time you launch a new billion-dollar device to the market, you run a loss for a couple of months and a couple of years. They were able to get out of that death spiral by being creative, by being able to offer a whole range of services, allow for digital content and distribution thereof, and basically figure out how to get out of the thing that was hurting the most, right? And so that's not just innovation in a sort of clear-cut say, like, oh, that's a cool case study. But we're talking about a $23 billion a year business here, right? So Sony managed to turn the tanker in a way that is seemingly impossible for its competitors in other categories. So that's sort of the mindset for me. Like, they think not just creatively about the content they create, but also about how to get that content out there and how to get that distributed in the hands of consumers. So if we then look for things on the horizon, some of the things that stand out to me go as follows. The understanding that the games industry as an audience is interesting is not just happy pillow talk. When we look, for instance, at eBay, when it spun off PayPal, the first thing that PayPal really did was to start getting involved with the one online consumer group that they knew was going to bring them great big success, which is gamers, right? So PayPal started investing very heavily in getting in front of people that couldn't figure out another way to get money into their online worlds. So they created all these digital wallets. And very quickly they realized that whatever it is that gamers do today, 3 years from now, average consumers will be doing the same thing. And so early on, you see PayPal roll into that, cater to that audience. And as a consequence, starts to grow its own business. And so you see now in terms of enterprise value, PayPal being far more valuable, in part because of its success with the gaming community and gamer audience compared to its original parent company, eBay. Of course, this has attracted a lot of attention also from big billion-dollar platforms. So we see soon to be no longer CEO Jeff Bezos, wriggling their way, buying their way into the games industry, particularly at that fragile moment when we have the transition from the PlayStation 4 to the PlayStation 5 as we go from one hardware generation to the next. Cloud gaming rolls in, tries to T-bone the industry and break into it in a way that's interesting for them, where they can claim the space and sort of grab a lot of the audience by way of using network effects from Amazon Prime, but also leveraging, of course, their AWS infrastructure. Microsoft's doing the same, Tencent's doing the same. Suddenly you see Google doing this with Google Stadia. Everybody wants to be part of the gamer audience because they've learned that lesson that PayPal learned so many years ago. If you want to be in the front row 5 years from now, you have to cater to gamers today. And then in real time, as I mentioned earlier, today was the kickoff for the court case between Apple and Epic Games. Tim Cook and Tim Sweeney have been going at it for the last year now, sort of dealing blows back and forth about what is a fair rate in the App Store. But so, in other words, we have these billion-dollar companies duking it out over what is the appropriate structure and strategy and relationship with the customer base for digital platforms, right? So it's not just purely about distribution of content. We're talking about ecosystem and the management of ecosystems writ large. So for me then, in the conversations that I have as an investor, that I have with creative teams and everybody in between, there's a few things that really stand out. And so play in the conventional sense is going to continue to be a part of it, but it's only going to be one part of it. So this is my family playing Mario Kart in Brooklyn. And it's some of the best times that we have as a family is like we play Mario Kart, the kid loves it, like we spend time together, it's so much fun, and it's very accessible, right? But so playing is a natural instinct that we all have, whether that's Sudoku puzzles on the subway, or I guess in normal times, or whether that's some elaborate multiplayer online game, it comes natural to all of us. So play stays to be part of it, but it so quickly also becomes something of a center of gravity for socializing, right? You go to any of the dive bars in the East Village and you'll find a pool bar, a pool table or a foosball table. People gather and commune around games. That's what they like to do. The same thing in sports stadiums and all kinds of manifestations really of social life that center themselves on some kind of competitive game-like activity. And so socializing is a key component that the games industry hasn't really fully brought out in its models. And that's something that's changing now too. And you see that, as I mentioned, with Pokemon Go. So Pokemon, the company Niantic behind Pokemon Go, they would host these large-scale Pokemon events where thousands of people come together and they all have a good time and they all just are big fans of this franchise. They enjoy it and they meet friends that are like-minded and so on. So just like you would go for a concert or a movie, people now congregate and hang out around a game. The game, in effect, is really just an excuse to hang out. And we did this, of course, in large numbers also during the pandemic. Right as we were separated from each other and told to stay home, people would congregate online in games like Animal Crossing: New Horizons. This sort of cutesy Nintendo game where you have your little island and you have to do your little chores of working and paying off your mortgage for this house that you own. But it allowed people to spend time together and with others without leaving their home because they couldn't, right? You weren't allowed. And so it filled a critical role during that period. As we then, of course, socialize, we can also just watch it. So this is a party I attended a few years ago. It was actually the Kentucky Derby 3 years ago, where all the kids get pushed into rooms. They go have fun. Like the grown-ups are watching the horse race. Another example to socialize, of course. And they're watching each of them take turns playing Fortnite. So watching other people play becomes a key piece of it. And that's just a bunch of kids. 2 blocks from my house at the Barclays Center, you have these professionally produced competitive events with Overwatch League, with ESL One, big titles, big productions by large publishers, to get 5,000 people in the room together to share and enjoy the things that they like to do in their own time by themselves, and to do it publicly with others in the same way that you would go to a sports event. And that has since then, of course, transitioned online, where now we have the music industry taking note of all these eyeballs and all these people wanting to do something online. So here we have Lil Nas X a few months ago in in Roblox, this massive event, millions of people attend this. And it's not just me passively watching it, it's like you can walk around it. So it's this increasingly elaborate experience over time where people are able to share together this like one-off event, this concert, and do this not just with hundreds at the same time, but thousands and millions at the same time. So it changes dramatically the scale of which we do things. From there, of course, we end up very quickly in the spending component. So we still spend a lot of money just in terms of buying the hardware, the equipment, the customization of your joysticks, your controllers. That's a big driver of revenue nowadays. Accessories, headsets, headphones. The pandemic, of course, has allowed us all to kind of spend a little bit more on this, but that's been something that's been going on for years. Most of my classes will have these avid PC gamers who built their own PC rig that buy the individual components, then spend a weekend putting it all together. They get the neon lights, they get the water cooler system, they get the mechanical keyboard for $200, which if that means nothing to you, that's exactly, that would be the right observation. That is such a geeky thing, but it has reached this massive scale, right? So while it's sort of, it's in my mind akin to what people do when they customize their cars and put a bunch of big rims on it. People do the same thing with their hardware at home. And of course, they spend money as much as they spend time. So some games become ridiculous in their demand for how many hours you need to spend to get through them. And that too then becomes sort of a status symbol of its own. So the latest innovation then earlier this year was the IPO, or the direct listing, I should say, for Roblox, a $43 billion valuation for a company that basically makes its money off of the work that other people do inside of its online universe. Right? So Roblox is this user-generated universe where people can create assets, they can create experiences, they can create little games that other people can share and also participate in, and they can charge money for that. And so that's a really interesting phenomenon because it changes dramatically the relationship between content creators and the consumers. And the publisher now is no longer this scepter-wielding, royalty, but really sort of more of a custodian and a facilitator. And it's, for me, I think it's an interesting phenomenon because it's a strange thing to observe. Your kid having Roblox birthday parties during the pandemic is they got to hang out somehow. But at the same time, it also allows for this expression and creativity with regards to sort of their presentation of self in a digital environment. But they're also learning the fundamentals of coding, right? So basically, this is non-code coding, as they will refer to it. Rather than writing script and learning all kinds of different languages, you can drag and drop, and you can do very intuitive. You can create very, very intuitively create different characters and different things inside of the game. And you see that then in a company like Electronic Arts, which is one of the largest game companies in the US. The Sims, one of their biggest franchises, where you create a sort of upper middle class lifestyle, and it's all about getting cool furniture in your house and managing your little herd of people. Once they open it up to user generated content, they realized that their team of professional content creators was absolutely unable to keep up with the amount of volume that their users were creating on their own, right? I mean, and to a factor of 1 to 12, right? So for every asset that its professional division created, their users had created 12. And it becomes then sort of a no-brainer to say, well, how do we harness this? How do we cultivate and how do we curate all of this content? So if that then is participation in terms of creating content, the next thing is, of course, impacting the game and the actual experiences in its own right. A few years ago, we saw an example called Twitch Plays Pokemon, where basically you were able to insert one command and millions of people did until they finished the game, right? And so you have to imagine this is a random, chaotic event to watch, but it ends up being something that's really, really fascinating because everybody kind of gets to be part of it. And having some live exercise where we all can create an impact, where we can all contribute in a meaningful way, that's something we had never seen, right? And so more recently then there was an experiment with Peak Rivals by a company called Genvid. It's an interesting phenomenon in that this was on Facebook. Here you have a title that is then something that's capable of hosting millions of people, all contributing and influencing this sort of Big Brother style video game where you get to vote who gets to do what. You steer your character towards make a campfire to stay warm, gather food so you won't go hungry, and then over the weeks and weeks, create that into a shared experience with millions of people online. So if that's not extreme enough, of course, then on the horizon, now fastly approaching are things like cryptocurrencies and non-fungible tokens, allowing you to not just buy digital assets and play with them, but also trade them, right? And now as a creative, I can distribute these things and sell them and make money. At the same time, I'm also as a player capable of holding on to a particular asset. And then over time, as they go up in value, sell them to someone else in the same way that we could do this previously with baseball cards, where you collect a baseball card and then sell them over time. You can do that now with digital assets, like a particular character out of a game. You can do that with even components of the game, like a spell or a weapon, right? And you can even go further and say, I own only a piece of a digital asset. I own 10% of this character, right? And so you start to see then that there is a myriad of ways that this revenue model is going to impact creativity in that space. And then you start to see lots of investment around it in terms of who can trade this, what is the value of those cryptocurrencies. Like Ethereum just hit $3,000. It's crazy to think that we, imagine explaining this to someone 20 years ago. But this, in my mind, collectively is not a statistical outlier, but the shape of things to come. So if you put them all together in sort of a flywheel, roughly it looks like this. And this is something I've been working with some companies on and experimenting. But this idea that we have to start thinking about interactive entertainment, not just in singular siloed phenomenon, but they are also interrelated, right? They impact and influence each other over time. So I think that there's more than enough talk out of me. I want to thank you all for giving me the opportunity to speak. I look forward to the conversation, and thank you for your time.
Thank you for such a fascinating presentation. So we'll now move into the Q&A section of our session, and we are getting quite a few questions in chat. First, we want to circle back to the court case that's happening today, Epic versus Apple. Now, you talk about, the discussion being what is the appropriate take rate for platform providers, in this case, Apple. And it's not just about revenues, because we saw a similar discussion on what is the appropriate use of user data for platform such as Facebook. So what's your view on platform providers changing their take rates or rules? Should we regulate this? If so, how would this change the game industry?
It's a fascinating question, it's currently a topic in motion, as you can tell, right? It's we have these $2 billion companies trying to figure this out. So the pretext to a lot of it goes as something as follows, where Steve Jobs sort of set the 30% take rate for digital distribution of music, basically based on the conventional cable TV business. That used to be the case there, and he sort of copied and pasted it for distribution on the App Store and on iTunes. And then from there, it just became sort of standard practice, right? So without getting too technical and sort of getting to the weeds of things, what Apple has effectively allowed everybody to do, on the one hand, early on, you see them subsidizing this adoption of its platform. So it wanted, of course, lots of game developers on the App Store making content. You'll remember Angry Birds and earlier iterations of games like that. And they basically said, for $100, you become a professional developer on our platform, and you can build whatever you want, provided that it meets the Apple's requirements, and you're off to the races. So everybody was going to be a millionaire. Everybody was going to build something and be rich. This is also the time when we just got hit with the crisis in 2008, 2009. So then a lot of the creative staff of like large firms got laid off. So they all ended up at the kitchen table building cool stuff. And so nobody really questioned, in other words, the 30% take rate. They thought, that's fair. I'm not making any money anyways. Let's see if this flies. Now, 10, 15 years later, the App Store is matured. Apple is, of course, this $1 trillion company. And people are starting to raise questions. They're like, well, okay, 30%, but what am I getting in exchange for that? And Apple lists it and it's like, well, data privacy and security, and we have payment processing fees, and there's a whole bunch of other stuff that needs to be paid for. So that's your 30%. And then Epic, which is the antagonist in this context, they go, that's not true. It's really only 12%, right? Even if we double the cost to get a margin out of it, it's still only 12% of what you should be paying. And so now suddenly we have this fist fight between one of the largest incumbent digital platforms and this other up-and-coming company that's trying to be its own platform, backed by the war chest of a Tencent, of Sony, and its own success with Fortnite. So there's these two very rich companies trying to figure out what's fair. And so it comes down to a fundamental shift, I think, ultimately, where the 30% was never going to be sustainable, purely because it's such a high bar. But at some point, the market hits a level of maturity and saturation that we're starting to compete on pricing. And so in order to get the next generation of cool content creators onto your platform, you're going to have to cut them a deal, and you're going to have to come down on this rate. And then once you do that for a few of them, which I think Apple has done with like Spotify and other providers, you end up very quickly in a place that you can't maintain that fee and that percentage. So Epic is accelerating that process, and I expect them to change it. Once the they say in Dutch, I'm from the Netherlands, so my metaphors are always have to do with cattle. Once the fence is off the dam, all the sheep and all the, they all go at once, right? So once Apple relents on this fee, it's going to be very difficult for anybody else to sustain a 30% cut. So it's interesting to see that happen in real time. It's a fascinating case.
So you spoke about the shift in audience dynamics, how the industry has shifted to multiplayer online gaming, and you talk about Roblox, where now we're seeing user-generated games. So what's interesting is you do have this setting that transact in cryptocurrency, which bypasses exchange rate, tax rates, but you also have a setting where you have global users that are multicultural. Do you see any trend or commonalities from the games that users are generating on Roblox? And they are typically younger, am I right?
They're typically younger. So gaming audiences tend to skew younger because it's an experimental space and it's something that requires some tech savviness, and it's a novel phenomenon, right? So I think in many ways, what's interesting, if I for a moment where there's sort of cultural studies has, like, it provides an unstructured space away from parental supervision where you can kind of experiment in your own time. You can tinker, it's sort of digital Legos, but you can also sort of experiment with your identity as you come of age. And so for those reasons, I think it's a very popular phenomenon among younger audiences. And then as they grow, they become more professional, more serious, and so on. What changes fundamentally is then the relationship between how we produce and distribute entertainment and how we consume it. It used to be, something like Wagner built a Festspielhaus back in the 1800s, and it was really meant to create a separation between the audience and everything that went on the stage. You had this mystic gulf, as they refer to it, and you would hide the audience, you would hide the musicians, and you would just have the opera take place in this sort of illuminated stage, and became this framed thing, and you would be in the dark watching it, and it becomes it's a regressive, pacifying experience. And so we've come to adhere to a phenomenon of media consumption where you just sit back, relax, and enjoy it. And that was the model for a lot of entertainment and creators in the space. What you're doing now is, like, in order to unlock what's going on, in order to enjoy the experience, fundamentally in gaming, you have to do something. You have to make decisions. You have to tell Mario to jump here and to go left. Without your input, it doesn't do anything. So to experience the actual thing, the vision of the creator, you have to participate by definition. Once you accept that, then, well, why not bend all of the rules, whether that's contributing to the ecosystem of a game and creating assets, to all the way to partial ownership of that ecosystem. Why not? Right? And so we've been thinking about entertainment, one sort of framed type of thinking, but there's all of those components, I think, are up for discussion. And Roblox is just the first manifestation of all of that.
Wow. So this is a direct quote from some of the questions that we are seeing. The direct quote would be, why people enjoy watching others play games? What's the psychology behind seeing others play video games? And I think if you grew up with siblings or cousins, we all have to take turns, and we grew up the habit of watching others. And, and here I sort of want to tie it to something else with Twitch, platform like Twitch, and that's clearly a great platform to reach younger audience. Mm-hmm. This reminded me of GameStop, where retailers were very good at doing physical sales, mm-hmm. And discarded the importance of shifting towards online sales. We know that people who are currently attending sports events are older, so the way to reach this younger audience would be through games. Mm-hmm. What is the opportunity here?
Mm-hmm. That's an excellent question. I think it gets to the heart of the transition of the games industry, in that if we look at GameStop, the role of GameStop isn't distribution, it's education and marketing, right? It sells, the way it makes money is it sells storefronts for a certain dollar value to publishers, saying, we will put your stuff on this shelf and not on that lower shelf over there, in sort of classic retail economics. That's how it makes money. What GameStop did, of course, very well as a specialty retailer is create this specialization, this concentration of effort, where its clerks are fantastically well read up in the industry, as opposed to whoever runs the games department at Walmart, right? GameStop executives always like to make fun of the fact that when you go to Walmart and ask for Grand Theft Auto, then Jennifer or Joey from Housewares has to come down and like open the glass box and like, is it this one? Have no sense of what you're actually asking as a consumer, and consequently, of course, it creates a much more loosey-goosey relationship. So from a retail perspective, GameStop was always that almost like that intersection where that's where people would commune in the same way that we've seen, and you'll remember some of this, like Tower Records. Tower Records was this musical retail empire until it, of course, failed to embrace digitalization. But that's where all the cool kids would come and hang out. And then occasionally, like Elton John would hang out in the San Francisco store. And so it becomes this sort of communal space more than anything else. GameStop has long done that. Since then, the gravity point of what's cool and where people share online has shifted. And so that's where Twitch comes in, where, if we, let's say, so the obvious comparison is that, well, that's where all the cool kids hang out and I can be online with others. You also have to remember that games still cost quite a bit of money. Either it's a $60 price tag at the start, or it's, am I going to dedicate 100 hours to like go through this experience? Is this worth my time? Better I go online and see somebody else, somebody I trust or somebody I've seen before, or whose judgment I share, and have them play it for a bit, and then make my decision that way. So it reduces, in other words, a lot of insecurity on the consumer side. Conventionally, GameStop would put out like a Game Informer, its magazine, and it was really meant to walk you through all the new releases. Now Twitch does that. It shows you where to go, what to play, what everybody's talking about. Here you can see them play it for hours on end. Maybe you want to get in, click this link and you can download it for free yourself. And so it reduces a lot of market inefficiency that is traditionally associated with the physical model. So the opportunity, to answer your question, is then, as you have all these people that are there anyways to figure out what's cool, what's the thing that need to be playing next, there is, of course, a gatekeeping function there, where there's curation. These are streamers that only do certain games. They only do horror games, right? Which is a big genre in the same way that metal is a big musical genre. It might not be for you, but there's dedicated fans for that. So it allows you to join a community that isn't anywhere else. Like, you can't do that at GameStop. You can't wait for all the horror fans to show up. So it has all these opportunities, and that for sponsors, for advertisers, allows them to come into that, as well as publishers to make some secondary revenue, and of course promote their games online in ways that they couldn't do before. So we've just started to scratch the surface on this.
Oh, so speaking of free-to-play games, the free-to-play games on mobile devices gaining more popularity. That's the main revenue source would be advertising dollars, right? And we're always looking, when we think about companies, all they're trying to do is sell services or products. Mm-hmm. So how do you see product placement or services being done in future games development? Mm-hmm. So you talk about Lil Nas, how it weaves music with games. Yeah. Any prediction here?
Oh, I mean, so here's the thing to know about all this. Every other form of entertainment has always had advertising as a fundamental component to revenue, right? Sports, music, film, video, it doesn't matter. Everything is sponsored, advertised, paid for by someone else. And we accept that. Like, no one has ever questioned that, right? And no one feels that somehow impacts the fidelity or the credibility of it. Everybody has accepted it. But in gaming, it's never happened. And that has a lot more to do with, the inability of the industry to work with the ad-based business, right? So that from a creative standpoint, they've been at odds for a long time. One of the case studies I discussed in the book is about Massive, which was acquired by Microsoft for $200 million, and it totally fell flat. And it had in part to do with the fact that you had these big cultural differences between the advertisers and the sponsors on the one hand, and then the game creators on the other hand, and they were just not friends, right? They were sort of cut from a different cloth. So that was then, right? That was when gaming was still a fringe activity. Today, gaming is a mainstream form of entertainment. So now we have billions of people. It can only be a matter of time that we are going to start monetizing that long tail audience that doesn't pay for anything in a free-to-play scenario, and say, look, if you don't want to pay us, then watch a few ads. Let's have McDonald's sponsor some game development, that have them sink 50 million bucks in like a cool game, and that can be sort of a vehicle for them. And they're only just now starting to make this connection. But you see companies like WPP and Publicis, these large advertising houses and labels, starting to finally create dedicated gaming divisions to figure out like how do we get our brand clients and these game companies to talk to each other in a meaningful way.
Yeah. Well, whether we like it or not, we do see gaming weaving into our lives. On Netflix, we see interactive movies. You can choose your own adventures or your ending. Mm-hmm. So let's end with this. And thank you. It's been such a fascinating session. What can we learn from the games industry that we can apply to other industry? If you were to sum up in one key lesson.
So the fundamental thing is that the games industry, because it was never taken very serious, because it was always on the fringes and always an underdog, whether that was with regards to commercial opportunities or the political rhetoric around it, they've become very self-reliant, and they've become capable in thinking through problems where, rather than extracting the most amount of money out of an IP, out of intellectual property, or whether it's holding on for dear life on this one thing that you own, the games industry and the executives and the creatives in there, they think creatively about their content as well as their business strategy. Whereas in my experience, most adjacent entertainment segments, they tend to think very singular in a silo type way about how they make money. And this is how it's done, right? And so the fundamental takeaway from the games industry for other entertainment businesses, in my mind, is be flexible and be agile in your approach. Technology is an opportunity, not a threat. Learning to reorganize your company, dealing with your relationship with your customer base in new and novel ways, it opens opportunity rather than trying to squeeze the margin out of it. And so that's my takeaway from it. Think creatively, both about the content as well as your business strategy.
That wraps up the Q&A portion of the event. I would like to thank Professor Van Dreunen on behalf of everyone for your time for today's talk. We're now going to transition to the discussion group portion of the event. We'll start by sharing a few questions provided by our faculty expert, Professor Van Dreunen. Shortly, we'll open up breakout rooms. You'll have 30 minutes to discuss a question with your peers if you stay on. You can go ahead and accept your breakout invitation when ready. I want to thank everyone again for joining us today. Next Monday is our very last session with Professor Amy Webb. To close out our series, Professor Webb will be discussing strategic foresight, how to tell signals from noise. We hope to see you then. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Julian.